classroom was quiet, except for the soft scratching of pencils on paper and the occasional shuffle of feet on the floor. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on the desks and chairs. It was just another ordinary school day, but for one little girl, this day would feel far from ordinary. She sat at her desk, hunched slightly, her hands folded in her lap. She was small, delicate, and seemed to blend into the background, as if she wished to be invisible. She had always been quiet, careful not to draw too much attention to herself, always polite, always measured. Most of the other children hardly noticed her, and that was exactly how she liked it. The teacher stood at the front of the room, clipboard in hand, scanning the students with sharp eyes. She was a strict woman, well known in the school for her demanding standards and her tendency to single out students in ways that could feel uncomfortable or even cruel. The children had learned over time to tread carefully around her, to follow the rules perfectly, and to avoid mistakes whenever possible. But the little girl, despite her quiet nature, had a gentle strength about her that often went unnoticed, at least until today. The teacher's gaze landed on her. The little girl felt it instantly, a piercing attention that made her stomach tighten. The other children seemed to sense it too, glancing at her with curiosity, some with barely concealed amusement. The teacher cleared her throat, the sound slicing through the calm hum of the classroom like a sharp blade. "Come forward," she said, her tone firm but not overly loud, as if she expected obedience without question. The little girl froze for a moment, unsure if she had heard correctly. Whispers began to ripple through the room. Some of the children tried to hide their smiles, while others leaned forward slightly, clearly intrigued. She swallowed hard, feeling a sudden lump in her throat. Her heart began to race. Come forward to where? What did the teacher want? The teacher gestured toward the piano sitting in the corner of the room. It was an old upright piano, its wood polished to a deep brown sheen, its keys slightly yellowed with age. The instrument had been there for years, mostly untouched, except during music lessons. But today it was not just an instrument. It was a stage, a spotlight, and a test all at once. "You are going to play for the class," the teacher said, her eyes fixed on the little girl. There was a sharpness in her voice, a subtle undercurrent that made it clear she expected the performance to be less than perfect. "Let's see if all that practice has meant anything." A murmur went through the classroom. The other children exchanged glances. Some tried to hide their anticipation, while others couldn't contain their curiosity. The little girl felt her cheeks flush, a wave of heat rushing over her face. She had practiced quietly at home on her own, away from prying eyes, away from judgment. She had loved the piano, loved the way her fingers could dance over the keys and create something beautiful, something pure. But now, being called to perform in front of the entire class, under the teacher's watchful eyes, felt like stepping into a storm. She hesitated, her small fingers twitching at her sides. Every instinct in her body told her to run, to retreat back to the safety of her desk, to disappear as she often wished she could. But there was also a quiet voice inside her, a tiny flicker of courage, reminding her that this was not a moment to hide. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she rose from her seat, her legs moving carefully across the floor. The classroom seemed to stretch around her. Every desk, every chair, every pair of eyes magnified in her mind. When she reached the piano, she paused. She could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on her, the teacher's gaze like a spotlight that made every movement feel exaggerated, every breath noticeable. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, taking a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of nerves swirling inside her. The soft scent of polish and wood filled the air as her fingers finally touched the keys. The first note was tentative, almost shy. She pressed it gently, and the sound resonated softly through the room. It was a small, delicate sound, not loud or commanding, but it carried a quiet honesty. The teacher's eyes narrowed slightly, as if measuring the sound against some invisible standard. Some of the children leaned forward, ears straining to catch every note. Others shifted in their seats, unsure what to expect. The little girl's hands shook slightly, but she continued, each note building slowly, cautiously, like a bird testing its wings. She could feel the teacher's eyes on her, and for a moment, the weight of judgment threatened to make her freeze again. But then, she remembered the hours she had spent practicing in secret, the countless afternoons when the music had been her only friend, her only comfort. She remembered the way the notes had felt like a language she understood perfectly, a language that belonged only to her. With that memory, something changed. Her fingers found their rhythm, moving more confidently across the keys. The notes began to flow, hesitant at first, but gradually gaining clarity and strength. The room was still quiet, the only sounds being the piano and the occasional creak of a chair. Even the teacher seemed momentarily caught off guard, her sharp expression softening ever so slightly as the music filled the space. Some of the children began to listen more closely, their earlier whispers fading into attentive silence. There was a sense of anticipation building, as if the entire class were holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The little girl's confidence continued to grow with each measure, each note, each phrase. She was no longer just playing for the teacher. She was playing for herself, for the music that had always been her refuge. As she reached the middle of her piece, something remarkable happened. The timid, nervous girl who had approached the piano moments ago was no longer the same. She sat tall, her posture steady, her fingers moving with precision and emotion. The music was no longer just sound. It was a story, a message, a reflection of her inner strength. The classroom seemed to shift around her, the air thick with attention and awe. Even the teacher, who had intended to embarrass her, found herself pausing, caught in the unexpected beauty of the performance. Her eyes, once sharp and critical, softened as she listened, realizing that this little girl had something extraordinary to offer. The other students, too, were captivated. Some were wide-eyed, mouths slightly open in surprise. Others exchanged glances, silently acknowledging that they had underestimated her. The little girl, still unaware of the effect she was having on the room, continued to play, pouring every ounce of focus and passion into the music. She was lost in it, completely absorbed, oblivious to the whispers, the stares, and the expectations. For the first time that day, she felt a sense of freedom, a quiet triumph over fear. The piano, once a source of nervous tension, had become her ally, her voice, her strength. By the time she reached the final notes, the classroom was completely silent, the kind of silence that comes when everyone is holding their breath, not wanting to break the spell. She pressed the last key and let it linger in the air, the sound echoing softly before fading. Her hands rested on her lap once more, trembling slightly, and she looked up at the teacher, unsure of what would come next. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind outside, the distant hum of life beyond the classroom walls. Then, slowly, a few students began to clap, tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm. The teacher, still seated at the front, allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, a recognition of talent and courage that had surprised her. The little girl's cheeks flushed, a mix of relief, pride, and lingering nerves washing over her. She had faced the challenge, had confronted the fear, and had found her voice in the most unexpected way. The classroom, once a place of potential embarrassment, had become a space where her quiet strength could shine. As she returned to her seat, the applause continued, the whispers of amazement filling the room. She felt a new sense of confidence, small but significant, growing inside her. Today had been difficult, intimidating, and terrifying, but it had also been transformative. She had discovered, in those few minutes at the piano, that courage and talent could shine even in the most unlikely circumstances, and that sometimes, the very thing meant to humiliate could instead reveal one's true strength. The rest of the class went on with their lessons, but the mood had changed. There was a quiet respect now, a recognition that this little girl was someone special, someone who had faced fear and emerged with grace and talent. And for the little girl herself, that moment at the piano would remain etched in her memory forever. A reminder that even in the face of judgment, One could rise, one could shine, and one could be heard. The classroom had returned to a quiet routine, yet there was a subtle change in the air. The students were no longer quite the same as before. A ripple of admiration had spread through the room after the little girl's piano performance. Some were still processing the surprise of what they had just heard, and others whispered quietly among themselves, sharing their astonishment. Even those who had been skeptical, or who had hoped for her to stumble, found themselves unsettled by the undeniable skill and emotion that had flowed from her fingertips. The teacher, for her part, remained at the front of the classroom, standing stiffly with arms crossed. Her expression was calm, but inside, she was unsettled. She had meant to expose the girl's nerves, to make her feel small in front of everyone, and instead, she had revealed a talent that none of the students, or even the teacher herself, had fully expected. She felt a strange mix of irritation, surprise, and grudging respect. The control she thought she held over the classroom dynamics had shifted, and it left her unsettled. The little girl returned to her seat, her hands still slightly trembling from the adrenaline. Her face was warm from the mix of nerves and pride, and she tried to focus on her desk, pretending as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But she could feel the eyes of her classmates lingering on her. Some stared with wide-eyed amazement. Others tried to act casual, but their whispers and glances betrayed curiosity and interest. Even the children who had once ignored her or dismissed her quietly nodded in her direction, acknowledging her bravery. One of her classmates, a boy who often teased others for their mistakes, leaned toward the girl and whispered, That was amazing. I didn't think you could do that." She nodded softly, a small smile touching her lips. She didn't want to draw too much attention to herself, but inside, a quiet warmth bloomed. For the first time, she felt seen not for being shy or quiet, but for something she had worked hard to cultivate, something that truly belonged to her. The teacher clapped her hands lightly to regain control over the room. "All right, everyone, back to work," she said, her voice sharper than usual, perhaps to cover the flicker of surprise that had crossed her face. "It's time to focus on the assignment for today." She gestured toward the notebooks on the desks. The students shuffled papers and opened books, but the atmosphere was different now. The whispers continued, though quieter this time, as each child processed the fact that their quiet classmate had a depth of talent they had never imagined. As the lesson progressed, the little girl tried to concentrate on her work, but her mind kept drifting back to the piano. She thought about how her fingers had moved across the keys, how the notes had sounded, and the way the music had seemed to flow naturally from her heart. She remembered the fleeting look on the teacher's face, a mixture of surprise, disbelief, and something she couldn't quite name. It made her wonder if perhaps the teacher had underestimated her, just as many others had. But there was no anger in her reflection, only a quiet determination. She realized that this moment had given her confidence, a proof that she could face fear and emerge stronger. Meanwhile, the teacher, observing the class, began to notice the subtle shifts in behavior. The other students were talking quietly among themselves, some exchanging ideas and opinions about the piano performance, others stealing glances at the girl with newfound respect. A few even seemed hesitant to tease anyone, aware that the little girl's quiet courage had set a new tone in the room. It was a lesson not just in music but in resilience, and it had rippled across the students in ways the teacher hadn't intended. As the morning wore on, the little girl began to feel a strange mixture of relief and nervous anticipation. Relief because she had faced the challenge and performed successfully, but nervousness because she could sense that her classmates now viewed her differently. She had always been careful to remain in the background, unnoticed, and now the spotlight was subtly following her, even when she didn't want it to. She wondered how this would change her interactions in class. Would people be kind, or would they start to expect more from her? The thought made her stomach flutter, but it also stirred a sense of curiosity. Perhaps this attention wasn't something to fear entirely. It could be a chance to grow, to share what she loved with others. During a short break, a few classmates approached her. One girl, who had previously ignored her, said softly, "I didn't know you could play like that." It was beautiful. The little girl's smile widened just slightly, and she murmured a quiet thank you. Another boy, who had been one of the first to laugh at her when the teacher called her forward, gave a small nod of acknowledgement. There was no teasing, no ridicule, only recognition, a rare and comforting thing. The little girl felt her chest swell with a mixture of relief and pride. For the first time, her talent had earned her attention in a positive way. Even so, there was an underlying tension that she couldn't shake. She knew that the teacher's challenge had been intended to embarrass her, and while it had backfired spectacularly, she also knew that the classroom could be unpredictable. Some students might react out of jealousy, others might gossip or try to compete with her. She realized that talent, while powerful, could attract both admiration and envy. She resolved to stay grounded, to continue practicing quietly, and to let her music speak for itself rather than seeking approval or attention. The rest of the day passed with a mixture of normal lessons and lingering excitement. Every now and then, a student would glance at her desk or make a quiet comment about the piano, but she kept her focus mostly on her work. She discovered that performing under pressure had not only tested her skill, but also her patience and self-control. She had learned how to remain composed despite fear, how to concentrate when every eye was upon her, and how to find calm in the midst of anxiety. It was a lesson far beyond what any textbook could offer. At recess, the children gathered outside, laughing and playing in the warm sunlight. The little girl found a quiet spot under a tree, watching the others with a gentle smile. She could hear their games, their chatter, and she felt a subtle shift in the way they moved around her. No one ignored her now, but neither did anyone try to overshadow her. There was a newfound respect, a silent acknowledgement of the quiet strength she possessed. She touched her fingers lightly, remembering the piano keys and the music that had carried her through the classroom earlier. It was a comforting reminder that her abilities were hers alone, and that they could bring her both joy and recognition without needing to boast or show off. Meanwhile, the teacher walked through the playground, observing the children. She noticed how her challenge had changed the dynamics among them. The class that had once been full of whispers and mischief now had a layer of respect and attentiveness that hadn't been there before. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that challenges could reveal hidden strengths in students, strengths that strict instruction alone might never uncover. She made a mental note to consider the ways she could nurture talent rather than only test it. The little girl, sitting quietly under the tree, had taught the teacher a subtle yet profound lesson in resilience, courage, and the unexpected power of a calm, focused spirit. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, the little girl gathered her belongings and slowly made her way to the door. Students passed by, some offering smiles, others nodding in quiet recognition. She walked with a newfound confidence, small yet tangible, carrying with her the memory of her piano performance and the lessons it had taught her. She understood now that courage was not about being fearless, it was about taking action despite fear. She had faced judgment, uncertainty, and the potential for embarrassment, and she had emerged stronger and more self-assured. On her way home, she thought about the next time she would play the piano. She imagined sitting at the keys, letting the music flow freely, and feeling the same quiet joy that had carried her through the classroom earlier. She knew that her talent was more than notes on a page. It was an extension of herself, a way to communicate her thoughts and emotions without words. And in a world where she often felt small and unnoticed, the piano had given her a voice, a presence, and a quiet power that no one could take away. That evening, she returned home and sat at the piano in her living room. The room was quiet, the soft hum of evening outside the window creating a peaceful backdrop. She pressed the keys gently, letting her fingers explore familiar melodies, feeling the music wrap around her like a comforting friend. The events of the day replayed in her mind. The teacher's challenge, the classroom full of curious eyes, the moment of fear, and the unfolding of her talent. A small, contented smile crossed her face. She realized that this was only the beginning, that each performance, each challenge, each moment of courage would help her grow stronger, not just as a musician, but as a person. By the time she finally rose from the piano, The evening sky had darkened into a deep, calming blue. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment and anticipation. The world was full of challenges, some small, some daunting, but she now knew that within her was the strength to face them. The little girl had learned something profound that day, that fear could be transformed into courage, that pressure could reveal hidden abilities, and that true talent would always find a way to shine, no matter the obstacles. And with that thought, she closed the piano lid softly, leaving the music to linger in the room, a gentle echo of the courage and quiet power that had carried her through a day she would never forget. The next day, the classroom buzzed with quiet excitement. The children had not forgotten the little girl's piano performance from the day before. Even as the teacher began the morning lesson, there were small, subtle glances directed toward her desk. Some of the students whispered quietly to each other, sharing their thoughts about what they had seen, while others tried to act as though nothing had changed. But the truth was clear. The little girl was no longer invisible. She had stepped into a new light, and everyone could see it, even if they didn't want to admit it. The teacher, aware of the shifting dynamics, kept a close eye on her students. She had expected some chaos after trying to embarrass the girl, but instead, something else had happened. The class had grown quieter, more attentive, almost cautious. The power of music had created a ripple effect that reached beyond the piano. She could feel the tension between expectation and admiration in the room, and though she rarely admitted it, she was impressed by the little girl's resilience. During the lesson, the teacher announced that it was almost time for music practice again. A subtle murmur ran through the classroom. The children exchanged glances, some curious, some slightly anxious, and a few even eager. The teacher turned to the little girl with a sharp gaze, one that carried both authority and a flicker of anticipation. "Today you will play again," she said firmly. There was a quiet pause, and then she added, "Let's see if yesterday was just a lucky moment or if you can really play with skill and feeling." The little girl's heart skipped a beat. She had expected this challenge, and a part of her felt nervous. Another part, however, felt a quiet determination. She had proven to herself yesterday that she could rise above fear. Now, she would see if she could continue to grow that courage. Taking a deep breath, she rose from her seat and walked toward the piano, her small steps steady despite the fluttering in her chest. As she approached, the classroom seemed to hold its breath. Her classmates watched closely, their curiosity mixed with admiration. Some of the children leaned forward, eager to hear the music again, while others fidgeted nervously, uncertain what to expect. The teacher, standing beside the piano this time, observed silently. She had planned to challenge the girl, but something in her posture hinted that she was now genuinely curious to see what the girl could do. The little girl's fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly at first. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting her memory of yesterday's performance fill her mind. She remembered the fear, the hesitation, and then the quiet strength that had emerged when she focused on the music. Slowly, she pressed the first note. It was soft and tentative, but it held a hint of confidence that hadn't been there before. The sound resonated through the classroom, and for a moment, there was a perfect silence, as if everyone was listening with rapt attention. With each note, she grew more confident. The music began to flow more naturally, her fingers moving with a grace and precision that seemed effortless. Her classmates could hardly believe what they were hearing. The shy, quiet girl who had always stayed in the background was now creating something powerful and moving. The melody filled the room, winding its way around the students' desks, brushing past their ears and stirring their emotions in subtle, unspoken ways. Some of the children exchanged astonished glances. They had expected nerves and mistakes, maybe even laughter, but instead, they heard music that carried emotion, skill, and beauty. The teacher's eyes narrowed slightly, a mixture of surprise and focus crossing her face. She had tried to test the girl, to find a crack in her confidence, but now she was forced to acknowledge that the child had something truly special. Her hands, though small, moved with an accuracy and expression that went beyond simple practice. The girl's confidence continued to build. The hesitant notes from the first few seconds had blossomed into a full, flowing melody that filled the room. Each phrase seemed to tell a story of courage, of determination, of overcoming fear. The students, who had once been quiet and unsure, were now captivated. The whispers had stopped entirely, replaced by attentive eyes and open ears. Even the teacher, usually composed and authoritative, found herself momentarily still. Her expression softened as she listened to the unfolding performance. As the music reached its middle section, the little girl leaned slightly into the piano, lost in the rhythm and emotion. She no longer thought about fear, about judgment, or about the eyes on her. She was entirely absorbed in the music, letting it guide her fingers, letting it express what words could not. Every note was precise, every pause intentional, every crescendo and diminuendo reflecting her inner world. She was no longer just playing a piano. She was telling a story, sharing a part of herself that few had ever glimpsed. The classroom was completely silent, the kind of silence that feels almost sacred. The children who had been skeptical now watched in awe, their previous doubts dissolving with each passing measure. Even those who had tried to tease or challenge her before felt a strange mixture of admiration and humility. They had witnessed something extraordinary. A quiet child, once underestimated, now commanding attention with her talent. The teacher, too, felt a shift inside herself. She had always believed in discipline and standards, in pushing students to improve through challenge. But now she saw that sometimes true growth came not from criticism or ridicule, but from opportunity, encouragement, and the chance to face fear head-on. The little girl's performance was a lesson not just in music, but in resilience, focus, and courage. The teacher realized that she had underestimated both the girl's talent and her ability to rise above pressure. As the melody swelled toward its climax, the little girl's hands moved faster, more confidently. She felt a surge of energy, a mix of excitement and liberation. The music filled the room, wrapping around every student and teacher, creating a shared experience that was almost tangible. Some of the children closed their eyes, letting the notes wash over them, while others leaned forward, mesmerized by the skill and emotion. The little girl, fully immersed in the moment, no longer worried about mistakes or judgment. She was simply expressing herself, letting the music be her voice. When she finally reached the last notes, she let them linger in the air, the sound fading slowly like a soft echo. There was a moment of absolute stillness, as if the entire classroom were holding its breath. Then, one by one, students began to clap. It started quietly, hesitant at first, but quickly grew into a warm, enthusiastic applause. The sound echoed off the walls, filling the room with admiration and joy. The little girl's cheeks flushed, a mixture of pride, relief, and happiness washing over her. She had faced another challenge and had risen above it. The teacher, who had been silent throughout most of the performance, finally spoke, her voice calm but carrying a tone of genuine acknowledgement. "Well done," she said. The simplicity of the words carried weight, a recognition of talent, effort, and courage. For the first time, the teacher seemed almost human, letting go of the strict authority and allowing admiration to show. The little girl smiled faintly, feeling a sense of connection and respect that went beyond mere words. After the performance, the little girl returned to her desk, still feeling the echoes of the music vibrating in her chest. Her classmates approached her slowly, offering congratulations, questions, and quiet praise. The shy child who had once remained invisible was now recognized, not just for her talent, but for the courage it took to share it. Some students who had been skeptical or teasing before now listened attentively, inspired by the strength she had shown. Throughout the rest of the day, the classroom carried a new energy. The music had left a mark, a subtle but undeniable shift in how the students viewed one another and themselves. They had witnessed courage and talent firsthand, and it had sparked a quiet admiration that could not be ignored. Even the teacher seemed affected, reconsidering her approach, realizing that sometimes encouragement and opportunity could be more powerful than strict discipline. When the final bell rang, signaling the end of the day, the little girl gathered her belongings slowly. She felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. Performing twice under scrutiny had tested her nerves, her focus, and her determination. Yet she had emerged stronger, more confident, and more self-assured. She understood now that fear was not something to avoid, but something to face, to use as fuel for growth and expression. Walking home that afternoon, the girl thought about the piano waiting for her at home. She imagined sitting at the keys, letting her fingers move freely, exploring melodies, and discovering new ways to express herself. The day had shown her that talent alone was not enough. Courage, focus, and determination were equally important. And as she walked through the quiet streets, the thought of music carried her forward, filling her with a sense of purpose and joy. By the time she arrived home, the sky was painted with soft colors of sunset. She sat at the piano, pressing the keys gently, allowing the familiar sounds to comfort her. Each note reminded her of the classroom, the performance, the applause, and the subtle yet powerful change that had occurred. She understood that this was only the beginning. The music, the courage, and the recognition were part of a journey, one that she was ready to embrace fully. That evening, she played for a long time, losing herself in the melodies, exploring new rhythms and harmonies, and savoring the quiet joy of creation. The little girl had discovered something profound, that courage and talent could coexist, that facing fear could reveal hidden strengths, and that music was more than sound. It was a voice, a presence, and a path to growth. And as the notes lingered in the room, she knew that her journey had only just begun. The following week arrived with a mixture of nervous anticipation and quiet excitement for the little girl. The memory of her last performance at school still lingered in her mind, fresh and vivid. She could feel the impact it had on her classmates, the subtle but unmistakable shift in the classroom energy, and even the teacher's cautious admiration. Yet, she knew that more challenges lay ahead. Music was a living thing. It demanded focus, courage, and constant practice. And she had realized that talent alone was not enough. She had to face fear, overcome doubt, and stay steady under pressure. That morning, the classroom was filled with the usual chatter and movement, but there was an underlying tension in the air. The students exchanged glances, whispered quietly, and occasionally nudged each other to watch the little girl, curiosity sparkling in their eyes. Even the teacher seemed alert, standing at the front with her arms crossed, a slight frown on her face, as if weighing the possibilities of what might happen today. The piano stood in the corner, gleaming softly in the morning sunlight, almost calling to the girl as if it had been waiting for her return. The teacher's voice cut through the murmurs. "Today we will have a special session," she said. Her tone was sharper than usual, and there was a subtle edge to her words that hinted at a challenge. "We will see who can truly demonstrate skill and focus under observation. And once again you will play." A hush fell over the room. Some students shifted nervously in their seats, unsure what was coming. Others leaned forward, eyes bright with anticipation. The little girl's heart beat faster. She had expected this moment, and while fear still touched the edges of her mind, she felt a steady confidence growing inside her. Yesterday had shown her that she could face attention, that she could rise to the occasion, and that her music could speak louder than any whisper or doubt. She stood and walked to the piano, her movements calm, though a small tremor ran through her hands. As she reached the instrument, she took a deep breath and let it out slowly. The classroom was completely silent now. Every eye seemed to be on her, every breath held in quiet attention. Even the teacher, who had intended to challenge her, watched with a careful, almost hesitant focus. The little girl felt the weight of expectation, but she no longer allowed it to intimidate her. Instead, she used it as fuel, letting it sharpen her awareness and focus. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, then pressed down gently. The first note filled the room, soft but deliberate, carrying a confidence that had been absent in the first performance. The children leaned forward, instantly drawn into the music. There was something different this time, an emotional depth that seemed to wrap around the room and hold everyone in a suspended moment of attention. The melody unfolded slowly, each note deliberate, each pause meaningful. The little girl's hands moved with precision and grace. She played with an awareness that went beyond practice or memorization. She played with feeling, with expression, and with a quiet authority. The music was alive, almost like a conversation between her and the room. The students listened intently, some with wide eyes, others with mouths slightly open in surprise. The teacher, who had hoped to test and perhaps embarrass her, felt a wave of unexpected astonishment. The child had transformed her nervous energy into a performance that was more than just technically correct. It was captivating, moving, and unforgettable. As she continued, the music began to swell. The notes grew stronger, more confident, and more intricate. The little girl leaned slightly into the piano, completely absorbed, as if the world outside had disappeared. She no longer thought of fear, of judgment, or of the pressure of everyone watching her. She only felt the music, and through it, she expressed emotions she had never spoken aloud. The melody spoke of courage, of quiet resilience, of the triumph of perseverance over doubt. The classroom responded to her in ways words could not describe. Every student was silent, drawn into the world she created with her music. The ones who had previously whispered, laughed, or doubted her now found themselves captivated, unable to look away. Even the teacher seemed momentarily caught in a rare human vulnerability, experiencing awe instead of authority. She had expected nervousness, mistakes, and perhaps some embarrassment for the girl, but what she witnessed was a commanding display of talent and confidence that left her speechless. Midway through the piece, the girl's fingers danced across the keys with increasing speed and precision. The music moved through dynamic highs and soft, gentle lows, capturing emotions that no one could have expected from someone so small and quiet. The room seemed to breathe with her, the sound echoing softly yet powerfully, wrapping around each listener and holding them in a state of complete attention. The little girl, immersed in the rhythm and flow, felt a deep sense of freedom. The notes were no longer just sounds. They were her voice, her expression, her presence in the room. The tension that had accompanied her earlier performances was gone. She had learned to harness it, to let it guide her rather than control her. Each note carried a clarity and conviction that silenced any doubt or ridicule. The music was her shield, her expression, and her quiet declaration of resilience. Every student, even those who had previously doubted her, was now focused entirely on the melody, aware that they were witnessing something rare and special. By the time she reached the climax of the piece, the little girl was fully confident. Her posture was upright, her hands moving with precision and fluidity, and her face reflected the joy and focus she felt inside. The melody reached soaring heights, and the classroom seemed to vibrate with the sound. Students leaned forward instinctively, caught in the powerful wave of music, while the teacher remained still, her eyes wide, absorbing every note and every nuance. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that true talent could not be judged or contained by expectation alone. As the music softened into the final notes, the room held its breath. The little girl pressed the last key, letting it linger in the air like a soft echo of her journey. Silence followed for a heartbeat, stretching longer than usual, until a spontaneous wave of applause broke it. The clapping grew, sincere and warm, spreading through the classroom like sunlight. Some students stood, others remained seated but clapped vigorously, all expressing admiration and acknowledgement for the girl's extraordinary performance. The teacher, still standing at the front, finally allowed herself a smile. Not the controlled, polite smile she usually offered, but a genuine one. She walked toward the girl and said softly, "That was remarkable." Her tone carried something she rarely allowed, genuine pride and recognition. For the little girl, the words felt like a quiet victory, the acknowledgement of effort, talent, and courage that transcended mere praise. After the performance, students approached her carefully, offering congratulations, compliments, and questions. Some asked how long she had practiced, others whispered about the beauty of the music. She answered softly, her words humble, but inside she felt the warmth of respect and admiration. She realized that the moment was not just about performing well. It was about proving to herself and others that fear could be overcome, that quiet strength could shine when allowed to speak. The rest of the school day passed in a new rhythm. The little girl felt different now, not because she had received attention, but because she had discovered a deeper sense of confidence. The classroom, too, seemed transformed. The students had witnessed courage and talent firsthand, and the subtle power of admiration and respect had replaced ridicule and doubt. Even the teacher seemed changed, her approach more thoughtful, her awareness of student potential sharpened by what she had seen. At recess, the little girl found a quiet spot under a tree, reflecting on the day. She could hear the laughter of other children, but it no longer felt distant or threatening. She had learned something profound, that courage was not about being fearless, but about moving forward despite fear. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a source of voice, confidence, and self-expression. And in that quiet moment under the tree, she felt a sense of calm joy, knowing that her journey of growth and discovery had only just begun. When the final bell rang, the little girl walked home slowly, savoring the evening air and the peace it brought. She thought about the piano at home, imagining the melodies she would create and the emotions she would express. Today had shown her that her talent was not something fragile or limited. It was powerful, resilient, and capable of touching others in ways she had never imagined. She understood now that courage, focus, and dedication could transform moments of fear into triumph, and that each challenge was an opportunity to grow stronger. That evening, she sat at the piano in her living room, her fingers gliding over the keys with confidence. The music filled the quiet house, echoing softly in the corners and bouncing off the walls. She played freely, exploring melodies and rhythms, letting her emotions flow through the notes. She remembered the classroom, the attentive eyes, the teacher's surprise, and the warmth of her classmates' applause. Each note was a reminder of her courage, her skill, and the potential that lay within her. By the time she finished, the room was calm and still. She rested her hands on the keys, feeling a quiet pride and satisfaction. She knew that there would be more challenges, more moments where fear or doubt might creep in. But she also knew that she had discovered a strength within herself that could rise above anything. The little girl had learned that true talent could shine even under pressure, that courage could transform fear into power, and that music, her music, was a voice that could never be silenced. And as she closed the piano lid softly, the last notes lingering in the air like a gentle whisper, she felt ready for whatever came next. The world was full of challenges, and she was ready to face them, one note, one melody, and one brave step at a time. The next morning, the little girl arrived at school with a quiet sense of anticipation. Over the past few days, her performances had transformed not only her confidence but also the way her classmates and teacher viewed her. She felt a mixture of calm and nervous excitement as she walked through the familiar hallways. For the first time, she noticed small gestures of respect. Students smiling at her in a new way, nodding as she passed by, some even whispering words of encouragement. The world felt subtly different, warmer, and somehow more open to her presence. The classroom was buzzing more than usual, though quietly, as if the children were waiting for something important. There was a tension in the air, not of fear, but of anticipation. The teacher stood at the front, her usual stern expression tempered by a quiet curiosity. She had seen the little girl rise above every challenge so far, each time impressing everyone with skill, confidence, and courage. Today, the teacher seemed to be weighing her next move carefully, wondering whether another test was needed, or whether the girl had already proven herself beyond doubt. The teacher finally spoke, her voice calm yet carrying an edge of authority. "Today, we will have a special performance," she said, glancing around the room. "Everyone will have a chance to listen and learn. Once again, you will play." The little girl felt her heart flutter. She had expected this, but anticipation still lingered. Yet, this time, the nervousness that had shadowed her before felt smaller, quieter. She understood now that she had faced challenges before, and each time she had discovered a strength within herself she hadn't known existed. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward the piano with steady steps. The classroom fell silent as she sat down. Her fingers hovered above the keys, a slight tremor betraying her nerves. But there was also a calm confidence in her posture. She closed her eyes briefly, recalling the melodies she had played, the courage she had summoned, and the faces of her classmates, who had watched her with wonder and respect. The piano keys felt familiar beneath her fingers, warm and welcoming, almost like an old friend. The first notes were soft, deliberate, and controlled. The music filled the room, gentle at first, almost a whisper, as if inviting everyone to listen closely. As she continued, the notes grew stronger, more confident, and more expressive. She played not just with skill, but with emotion, conveying stories without words, emotions without explanation. The children leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the melody, feeling the power of her courage and talent in every note. The teacher watched closely, her usual stern expression softened. She had intended to challenge, to find a flaw, to push the girl into discomfort. But instead, she had witnessed something extraordinary. The little girl was no longer shy or hesitant. She was commanding attention with a quiet authority, using her music to communicate strength, vulnerability, and beauty all at once. The teacher realized that this performance was more than just music. It was a lesson in courage, self-expression, and resilience. The melody began to flow more freely as the little girl became fully absorbed in her music. Her fingers moved gracefully over the keys, navigating complex patterns with precision and ease. She played with confidence, emotion, and a deep sense of presence. Each note seemed to carry a story. Moments of fear transformed into courage, uncertainty into focus, hesitation into clarity. Her classmates sat in awe, completely absorbed, experiencing the music as a shared journey rather than just a performance. Some students, who had previously been skeptical, found themselves silently acknowledging her strength. Others whispered to each other, amazed at how a quiet, seemingly ordinary child could convey so much through her music. The teacher, too, felt a subtle shift within herself. She had always believed in discipline and instruction, but she realized that true growth often came from moments of opportunity, courage, and self-expression. This performance was proof of that truth. As the music progressed, the little girl began to experiment slightly, adding delicate flourishes and subtle variations that showcased her creativity. The melody rose and fell like gentle waves, filling the classroom with a living, breathing story. Every student was captivated, listening intently, some even closing their eyes to better experience the emotion conveyed through each note. The music seemed to reach beyond the physical space of the room, touching hearts in a way words could never achieve. By the middle of the piece, the little girl was completely in her element. She no longer felt pressure, only a quiet joy and focus. The music became a bridge between her inner world and the outside world, a way to communicate feelings she had never been able to express through speech alone. Her classmates were silent, not out of fear, but out of respect and awe. Even those who had once teased or doubted her were now silent witnesses to the beauty of her courage and talent. The teacher, standing near the piano, felt a mixture of surprise and pride. She had intended to test the girl, to see if she could falter under pressure, but she now recognized that the child's talent and resilience could not be diminished by expectation or doubt. The music was a living testament to determination, courage, and the quiet strength that had always existed within her. The teacher realized that this moment, this performance, would likely stay with the class for a long time. Not just for the music itself, but for the lesson in bravery and self-belief it carried. As the piece approached its final section, the little girl's fingers moved with increasing confidence and precision. The melody soared and dipped, expressing a full spectrum of emotion. The classroom was completely absorbed, every eye and ear fixed on her, every student feeling the subtle power of her courage through her music. There was no whisper of ridicule, no hint of doubt, only admiration, awe, and a shared sense of witnessing something extraordinary. The final notes were deliberate, strong, and resonant. She allowed each to linger in the air, giving the room a moment to breathe and reflect. The silence that followed was thick, almost tangible, as everyone processed what they had just experienced. Then, slowly, applause began. It started as a few scattered claps, but soon grew into a chorus of appreciation and recognition. Students stood, cheered, and smiled, expressing admiration for the courage, skill, and emotion that had filled the classroom. The little girl smiled faintly, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. She had faced fear, pressure, and expectation, and had turned it into something beautiful. Her music had spoken for her, expressing emotions and strength she had struggled to convey in words. She realized that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of it. And through her talent, she had shown that even quiet, reserved people could command attention and inspire others without changing who they were. The teacher approached her, her face softened with genuine acknowledgement. "That was remarkable," she said simply. There was no hidden criticism, no expectation, only sincere recognition. The little girl nodded, feeling warmth and quiet pride. She understood that this moment was not just about performing well. It was about proving to herself, and to everyone around her, that resilience, talent, and courage could overcome fear and expectation. The rest of the day passed differently from usual. The children treated her with a mixture of admiration and respect. Some asked questions about her music, others complimented her quietly, and a few even sought advice on learning piano themselves. The girl responded softly, humbly, happy to share what she loved, yet still maintaining the quiet confidence that had become her signature. She understood that recognition was not the goal. The music, the courage, and the self-belief were what truly mattered. At recess, she sat under a tree, watching her classmates play. She felt a sense of calm and contentment she had never experienced before. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was her voice, her strength, and her way to communicate emotions she could not otherwise express. The events of the past week had shown her that fear and doubt could be transformed into courage and self-expression. Every challenge she faced now felt like an opportunity to grow, to explore her abilities, and to discover new depths within herself. When the school day ended, she walked home slowly, savoring the quiet streets and the warmth of the evening sun. She thought about the piano waiting for her at home, and she imagined the melodies she would play, the emotions she would convey, and the joy she would feel. She realized that talent, courage, and self-expression were intertwined. One could not flourish without the others, and each performance, each challenge, was a step toward discovering her own potential. At home, she sat at the piano, letting her fingers move freely. The room was filled with the gentle sound of music, echoing softly in the quiet house. She explored new melodies, experimenting with rhythm, tone, and emotion, completely absorbed in the act of creation. Each note reminded her of the classroom, the attentive eyes, the applause, and the journey she had taken. She understood that this was only the beginning of her path. Music was not just an activity. It was a way to express herself, to face challenges, and to inspire others. As the evening sky darkened outside, she closed the piano lid gently. The last notes lingered in the air, a soft echo of courage, resilience, and self-belief. She felt a quiet pride and a deep sense of peace. The little girl had grown stronger through her experiences, learning that fear could be faced, that talent could shine even under pressure, and that true expression came from honesty, courage, and dedication. She knew that the world would continue to present challenges, but she now had the confidence, the skills, and the quiet strength to meet them head-on. And as she prepared for bed that night, she reflected on the journey she had taken. The classroom, the performances, the applause, and even the initial fear and doubt had all been part of a larger lesson. That courage, talent, and persistence could transform not only moments of fear into triumph, but also the way others saw her. She understood that her journey was just beginning, but she felt ready. For the first time, she realized that she could face any challenge, share her talents boldly, and inspire others without losing herself. The little girl drifted off to sleep that night with a smile on her face, a sense of calm fulfillment in her heart, and the soft echo of music lingering in her mind. A reminder that courage, talent, and perseverance could truly change everything.